Welcome to Just Stories. We hope you enjoy the story. Forgotten Victory, The Legacy and Lessons of the Korean War, by Just Stories. Chapter 1, The Origins of a Forgotten War. Welcome to the first chapter of Forgotten Victory, The Legacy and Lessons of the Korean War. In this chapter, we will explore the political and historical background of the Korean War, including the division of Korea after World War II, the rise of communist movements in the North, and the early stages of the conflict in 1950. In August 1945, Japan surrendered to the Allied powers, effectively ending World War II. In the aftermath of the war, the Korean peninsula, which had been under Japanese colonial rule since 1910, was divided into two zones of occupation, the Soviet-backed North and the US-backed South. The division was intended to be temporary, with the goal of reunifying Korea under a single government. However, the two zones quickly developed into separate and distinct political entities, with different economic systems and ideologies. In the North, the Soviet Union installed Kim Il-sung, a Korean communist and guerrilla fighter who had fought against the Japanese during the war, as the leader of the newly formed Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Kim set about consolidating his power and establishing a socialist state, with close ties to the Soviet Union and China. In the South, the United States supported a series of conservative and authoritarian governments, led by Syngman Rhee. Rhee was a Korean nationalist who had spent many years in exile, agitating for Korean independence from Japan. However, he was also deeply suspicious of communism and sympathetic to right-wing elements in South Korea. The division of Korea was further complicated by the Cold War, the ideological and military standoff between the Western powers and the Soviet bloc. As tensions between the two sides escalated in the late 1940s, the Korean peninsula became a key strategic battleground. Both the US and the Soviet Union saw Korea as a potential flashpoint for conflict and sought to establish their influence there. In 1949, the Soviet Union withdrew its troops from North Korea, leaving behind a well-equipped and trained army. Kim Il-sung saw this as an opportunity to reunify Korea by force and began to plan for an invasion of the South. He sought support from the Soviet Union and China, who provided military and economic aid, as well as encouragement for his aggressive plans. On June 25, 1950, North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel, the border between North and South Korea, launching a surprise invasion of the South. The South Korean army, poorly equipped and trained, was quickly overwhelmed, and the capital, Seoul, fell within days. The United States, which had been caught off guard by the attack, mobilized its military forces in the region and sought support from the United Nations Security Council. In conclusion, the Korean War was the result of a complex web of historical, political, and ideological factors, including the division of Korea after World War II, the rise of communist movements in the North, and the global tensions of the Cold War. These factors set the stage for the conflict that erupted in 1950, as North Korea sought to reunify the peninsula by force and the United States and its allies sought to contain the spread of communism. In the next chapter, we will explore the military strategies and tactics used by both sides during the Korean War. Chapter 2, A War of Ambiguity. Welcome to the second chapter of Forgotten Victory, The Legacy and Lessons of the Korean War. In this chapter, we will focus on the military strategies and tactics used by both sides during the Korean War, including the initial North Korean invasion, the United Nations response, and the eventual stalemate along the 38th parallel. The Korean War was characterized by ambiguity from the outset. The initial North Korean invasion caught the United States and its allies off guard, and they were forced to scramble to respond. The United Nations Security Council, with the Soviet Union absent due to a boycott, passed a resolution condemning the invasion and calling for member states to provide military assistance to South Korea. In response, 21 countries, including the United States, sent troops and equipment to Korea. The United States played a dominant role in the UN forces, and General Douglas MacArthur was appointed as the overall commander. MacArthur quickly launched a counteroffensive, pushing the North Korean forces back and liberating Seoul. However, he also pursued a bold and risky strategy of landing troops behind enemy lines at the port of Incheon. This daring move caught the North Koreans off guard and helped to turn the tide of the war. However, the situation soon became more complicated. China, which had previously been neutral in the conflict, began to see the North Korean situation as a threat to its own security. In October 1950, Chinese forces crossed the Yalu River into North Korea, catching the UN forces by surprise once again. This marked a turning point in the war, as the Chinese forces were numerous and well-equipped, and they quickly pushed the UN forces back south. The Korean War then settled into a brutal and protracted stalemate, with both sides digging in and fighting a war of attrition. The front lines fluctuated, with each side launching occasional offensives but unable to make significant gains. The use of air power became increasingly important, with both sides bombing each other's positions and attempting to disrupt supply lines. Chemical weapons were also used, with the United States dropping napalm and other agents on North Korean positions. The war also took a heavy toll on civilians, who were caught in the crossfire and often targeted by both sides. Many Koreans were forced to flee their homes and become refugees, with estimates ranging from 2 to 4 million people displaced by the conflict. In conclusion, the Korean War was a war of ambiguity from start to finish. The surprise North Korean invasion, the risky Incheon landing, and the Chinese intervention all demonstrated the unpredictable nature of the conflict. The eventual stalemate along the 38th parallel was a testament to the resilience and determination of both sides, but it also led to a devastating toll on civilians and a lasting division of the Korean peninsula. In the next chapter, we will delve into the experiences of soldiers and civilians caught up in the Korean War. Chapter 3: The Human Cost of a Forgotten War. Welcome to the third chapter of Forgotten Victory, the Legacy and Lessons of the Korean War. In this chapter, we will delve into the experiences of soldiers and civilians caught up in the Korean War, including the brutal fighting on the front lines, the impact of bombing and chemical warfare, and the trauma and displacement of millions of Koreans. The Korean War was a brutal and bloody conflict that took a heavy toll on both soldiers and civilians. The fighting was often fierce and chaotic, with battles waged in difficult terrain and extreme weather conditions. Soldiers on both sides faced harsh conditions, including exposure to cold, hunger, and disease. The use of air power was also a defining feature of the Korean War. Both sides bombed each other's positions and targeted civilian areas, resulting in widespread destruction and loss of life. The United States dropped more bombs on North Korea than it had on Japan during World War II, and the impact on civilians was devastating. Cities, towns, and villages were reduced to rubble, and many civilians were killed or injured in the bombing raids. Chemical warfare was also used during the Korean War, with both sides deploying agents such as napalm, white phosphorus, and tear gas. These weapons caused horrific injuries and burns, and many soldiers and civilians were permanently scarred or disabled as a result. The Korean War also had a profound impact on Korean civilians, who were caught in the crossfire and often targeted by both sides. Many were forced to flee their homes and become refugees, with estimates ranging from 2 to 4 million people displaced by the conflict. The separation of families and communities was a particularly traumatic aspect of the war, with many Koreans still struggling to find information about lost loved ones. The experiences of soldiers and civilians during the Korean War were often traumatic and harrowing. Many soldiers suffered physical and emotional injuries that would last a lifetime, and many struggled to reintegrate into civilian life after the war. Civilians who survived the conflict faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives and communities in the aftermath of the devastation. In conclusion, the human cost of the Korean War was enormous, with millions of people affected by the conflict. The fighting on the front lines, the bombing and chemical warfare, and the trauma and displacement of civilians all contributed to a lasting legacy of pain and suffering. In the next chapter, we will examine the aftermath of the Korean War, including the armistice agreement that ended the fighting and the ongoing division of the Korean Peninsula. Chapter 4: Legacy and Impact. Welcome to the fourth chapter of Forgotten Victory, the Legacy and Lessons of the Korean War. In this chapter, we will examine the aftermath of the Korean War, including the armistice agreement that ended the fighting, the ongoing division of the Korean Peninsula, and the global implications of the Cold War conflict. The Korean War ended in a stalemate in 1953, with the signing of an armistice agreement that established a demilitarized zone along the 38th parallel. The agreement also provided for the exchange of prisoners of war and the establishment of a joint commission to oversee the ceasefire. However, it did not formally end the war, and the two sides remain technically at war to this day. The division of the Korean Peninsula remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Korean War. The DMZ has become one of the most heavily fortified borders in the world, with thousands of troops on both sides facing each other across the demarcation line. North Korea remains a repressive and isolated regime, while South Korea has become a prosperous and democratic society. The ongoing division of Korea continues to be a source of tension and instability in the region. The Korean War also had significant global implications, particularly in the context of the Cold War. The conflict was seen as a test of the United States' commitment to containing communism, and it helped to establish the United States as a global superpower. It also contributed to the deepening of the Cold War divide, with the Soviet Union and China providing military and economic support to North Korea. The Korean War also had a lasting impact on the military and strategic thinking of the United States. The experience of fighting a limited war against a determined adversary in difficult terrain and extreme conditions helped to shape U.S. military doctrine for decades to come. The Korean War also saw the first use of helicopters in combat, which revolutionized the way that troops were transported and supported in the field. In conclusion, the Korean War had a profound and lasting impact on the Korean Peninsula and the wider world. The ongoing division of Korea, the global implications of the Cold War conflict, and the lessons learned by the U.S. military all continue to shape our understanding of the war and its legacy. In the final chapter, we will consider the enduring lessons of the Korean War and their relevance for today's world. Chapter 5: Lessons for the Future. Welcome to the final chapter of Forgotten Victory, the legacy and lessons of the Korean War. In this chapter, we will consider the enduring lessons of the Korean War and their relevance for today's world. The Korean War provides important insights into the challenges of resolving conflicts, building peace, and promoting reconciliation in a divided world. One of the key lessons of the Korean War is the importance of diplomacy and multilateralism in resolving conflicts. The Korean War was a result of the failure of the international community to work together to prevent conflict and address the underlying political and economic issues. The United Nations was able to respond to the North Korean invasion, but its actions were limited by the absence of the Soviet Union from the Security Council. Today, there is a need for stronger multilateral institutions and a renewed commitment to diplomacy as a means of resolving conflicts peacefully. The Korean War also highlights the dangers of nuclear brinksmanship and the importance of arms control and disarmament. The Korean War took place during a period of intense nuclear competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, and there were fears that the conflict could escalate into a full-scale nuclear war. Today, the threat of nuclear war remains a major concern, and there is a need for renewed efforts to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and reduce the risk of accidental or intentional use. The Korean War also underscores the challenges of building peace and reconciliation in a divided world. The division of Korea remains a major source of tension and instability in the region, and the legacy of the war continues to shape the politics and society of both North and South Korea. Reconciliation between the two Koreas remains elusive, but the Korean War provides important lessons on the need for dialogue, understanding, and a commitment to shared values and principles. Another lesson of the Korean War is the importance of learning from history and avoiding the mistakes of the past. The Korean War was a result of a complex set of historical, political, and ideological factors, and there are many lessons to be learned from the conflict. By studying the Korean War and its legacy, we can gain a better understanding of the challenges facing our world today and work to build a more peaceful and prosperous future. In conclusion, the Korean War provides important lessons for the future, including the importance of diplomacy, arms control, reconciliation, and learning from history. As we face new challenges and conflicts in the world today, it is more important than ever to heed these lessons and work towards a more peaceful and just world. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the legacy and lessons of the Korean War. Thank you for watching our story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on our next video.